So good evening. I'm Christine Quinn, and I am the founder of Living Kindness, and we are a recovery community for families. So those who might have children struggling with substance misuse, a spouse, a friend, anyone who wants to be an ally, so that we can come in together as community and ensure that no one needs to travel this journey alone. So it's a delight for all of you to be joining us this evening. And tonight, as you know, the conversation is about adoption, trauma, and substance misuse. And it allows us to have a conversation and deepen our understanding about adoption. What are some of the trauma and the hard points through the adoption process, and how does substance misuse sometimes enter that picture? And with that, there are about 10 million people in the US that are adopted. And those who are adopted have a 50% greater chance of struggling with substance misuse than non-adoptees. So we can see that this is an issue, and an opportunity for us to dig in, to learn more, and to be in community with that. So to begin our conversation today, I've invited Peter Bork and Chris Vittetoe to engage in our conversation with us. Chris is a recovery coach and also the founder of Grace Walker Ventures. He's an adoptee. He's here to share his story, and he is committed to holistic healing and continues that journey and to walk and role model that journey. And Peter is an adoptee, and he's on his recovery journey. I actually met Peter many years ago when I was teaching at the collegiate level, and he was one of my students. And he refers to me yet as his favorite professor. I don't know if he's just sucking up or not yet, but anyway. and he also went to high school with my niece. So it's great to have Peter as part of this conversation as well. So with that, we'll ask you to introduce yourselves in a little bit as well. But now we're just going to begin our conversation. Chris, I'd like to begin with you and for you to share a little bit about how you come to this conversation and what you've learned about adoption and substance misuse that might help others who are on a similar journey.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I appreciate the platform. Everyone, thank you for attending and being here. Look, for me, I can only speak to my story, and I think that's part of what I'm kind of promoting and out there talking about is like we all need to share our own stories, and we all need to create our own stories. So, for me, my story is my biological mother was 20 years old when she had me. I was 40 weeks, full gestation, but immediately handed over to other caretakers. And she went on her way, and I was taken up to Edna Gladney Home in Fort Worth. I'm born in Austin, Texas. And for 30 days, I was in observation with a heart murmur. And knowing what I know now about it, one, I'm blessed to be here, right? And that I wasn't part of the other side of the story, which I wasn't able to tell one. So I'm glad to be able to tell mine. So I missed out on a big opportunity. You're sitting there 40 weeks in utero and you're creating a bond with someone, and all of a sudden it's just snapped. And I'm Christine knows that I'm doing this journey of intrinsic health with this guy, Zach Bush, and he has a quote, and I have to say it because it's so good. He says, "We're all addicted because we all have the same original wound. And that original wound is one of detachment, one of abandonment from the greater organism." And his view is of the organism of life, of plants, animals in the world and nature. But put that in the context of a child who was just born, and then he gets immediate detachment and all the things that come from that in a second. I mean, it's a huge trauma, it's a huge pain, and stress that never really gets, unless you have a story where you reconnect there's a bond that's been broken forever. So when it comes to addiction, um, there's a reason why people escape from that, abandonment, and why they detach and they move to a substance or something that gives them that warm hug, that you never got. Right. So I think that's what's driven me to this, and my own story of wanting to share it with as many people as possible. And until I kind of looked inward at myself in my life, I wasn't able to reconcile kind of the past. And you know what? Those first 30 days, um, I may never be able to reconcile, but I've become more comfortable with who I am and more comfortable with sharing the story of the shame and the fear, that comes with being, quote unquote, abandoned.
Thank you so much, Chris. And many know that I am an adoptive parent, and I also have a grandson through adoption. And so, as you talk about the whole issue of abandonment, I have to say, as we were pursuing the whole path of adoption, that was not part of the conversation. So, I find this very enlightening and also think it's important for adoptive parents to have this information. So, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, Peter, we're going to bounce to you here, and maybe you can share a little bit about how your adoption story has shaped your sense of identity and how it also influenced your journey of substance misuse.
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Christine, and thank you, Chris, as well. It's very grateful for me and a complete pleasure to be able to share my story. Not to mention the first time I've ever shared my story on a platform as such as this. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try to answer this and tell my story in like 48 years down into about 7-8 minutes, something like that.
Timer is on, okay?
So we'll see how we do here. Growing up, I always knew I was adopted. To this day, and it may sound a little passe, but I still believe that I have the greatest parents on the planet. They never hid the fact that I was adopted. Growing up, I was a typical kid. Got involved in sports. My brother is also adopted. He's 2 years older than me. Growing up, we were typical brothers. You bicker back and forth, you fight as siblings do. But I always wanted to be like my big brother. So, he played baseball, well, then I had to. He played hockey, well, then I had to. He played football, and I said, yeah, I don't think that one's for me. He said I would regret it, but I don't regret that. But I always knew I was adopted. And, graduated high school, went into college, and when I was 22 years old, I came home from spring break one year, and I found this envelope down on my desk with a return address that I did not know. And I opened up the envelope, and it was a 5-page letter from a lady claiming to be my biological mother. So I actually had my best friend next to me at the time, and I probably went a couple shades of white because I didn't know exactly what I was reading. I showed my mom that, and she really didn't know what to make sense of it either. She included her phone number, and probably about a month later, I had called her, had a conversation with her, and it happened that my biological father, after not seeing her for 20 years, knocked on her door one day and said he was having dreams about finding me. So I ended up, the clincher was that I knew from my mom what my original name was. And when I asked my biological mother that question, she gave me that same answer. And my original name was Nathan. I personally like Peter a whole lot better, but that's just me. But anyway, fast forward, I had a very good relationship with both of them actually for about 12 years. And then my biological mother and I had a falling out. We didn't talk for about 5 after that. And then we kind of got back in touch with each other again. And I ended up kind of letting that relationship go by the wayside because uh, she didn't have boundaries. I don't think she really knew where they were. She was always made me feel like she was trying to make up for lost time. Um, so on my terms, I let go of that relationship. My biological father, on the other hand, um, we always, for 20 years, we had a great relationship, or at least I thought. Played a lot of golf together in the summertime. He's got 2 brothers, and I got to know the entire family. About 7 years ago, I sent him a text message on right before Christmas to ask where Christmas was because I would spend Christmas Eve with them, and didn't hear anything. And a day later, he sent me a text back that was probably it was long, and it was full of name calling. It ran from calling me a freeloader, ungrateful, um, getting mad at me because I didn't invite him over for a housewarming party after I had bought my house. Um, no, it completely did not understand where it was coming from. Uh, Immediately after reading that, I tried to call him. He had blocked my phone number. He had blocked me on Facebook. He had blocked me on every single thing that I had access to myself after 20 years. This is a gentleman that met my parents on several occasions. It's a gentleman that met some of my friends along the way. And it is also somebody that he confided in to me with a couple serious issues that he had. And it was in a snap of a finger, it was gone. And from that point forward, I didn't know what to do. So I started to drink, and I steady little by little, it got worse. Then it would get better, and then it would get worse. I did seek therapy to try to help me through that. I probably should have taken it a little more seriously at the time. But then then it started to get picked back up again. And then it got better. And I thought I was getting better. And then I went to my mailbox one day and there was a letter addressed to me. Had his writing on the return address, but it had his wife's name on the address to me. I never opened that letter. The girl I was dating at the time asked me if she could open it because she knew a fancy way how to open it without it looking like it was open and could be able to seal it back up. She read it, and really the only sentence she told me was, "It's not worth your time." So that was a kick in the gut. That you have the audacity to write me a letter, more likely than not, ripping me apart again. So my drinking again after that picked back up, and then it slowed down. And then about 2 months after that, I got a call from my mom, and said that she had a envelope at their house from them, and I didn't know what to make of it. But what they did is they took that same letter in that same envelope, they put it in a larger envelope, and they sent it actually addressed to my mother and my dad. And if I thought the wind didn't get knocked out of me the first time around, it really got knocked out of me that second time around. And then from that point forward, it was game on. I was able to control it to a certain point. But as the years went by, I was getting to a point where I couldn't control it. I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd have to have a drink in order to function. After I got about 3 years ago, almost 5 years ago now that I met Rachel, um, she had no idea. Nobody had any idea. I did a lot of drinking in isolation, but then I go out, I'd have a beer in my hand. I'd only have one, 2 beers, and then I'd leave. Anytime every family function, I was always at. But the one big secret that nobody knew is that I had many drinks before I got there, and I had many drinks when I got home. And it got to a point, 508 days ago, that I had everything on the line. Rachel had given me an ultimatum and left for the weekend, and my parents just so happened to be out of town on vacation, so I packed up a bag and went home, and basically drank myself silly for about 7 days. And on that last day, happened to be on a Friday, I woke up. I don't even know if by that point, I don't even know if I could really get hungover anymore, as much as I was just took a little slight nap before I continued drinking again. And I took one drink, and it made me sick. I couldn't even stomach the drink. So I went down by the lake and sat on the pier as I did as a kid. And I was sitting there listening to the water, and I had some people will call it a spiritual encounter. You know, I like to, refer it to as a come to Jesus meeting. And that meeting was that voice saying, I kept you safe this far. You know you need help. You better get help, because if you don't, my hands are off. And from this point forward, you're on your own. I kept you safe I never harmed myself, never harmed anybody else, never got in trouble with the law. And how I made it that far, I don't know, but I'm very grateful that I did. And I remember I picked up the phone, and for the first time, I picked up the phone. I called Rachel and I said, I need help. She came and stayed with me on that Friday evening, and she got me to go to the ER here in Beaver Dam the next morning on Saturday. I was so dehydrated that my urine was orange, and it took two bags of IV to get me properly hydrated. And if that gives anybody some sort of indicator how much I was drinking at the time, that's a lot. So I went from the ER that same afternoon. I went up to a detox facility in Fond du Lac. The stars must have aligned, because months prior I was trying to get clean but wasn't serious about it. It took Rachel calling all over the state of Wisconsin that didn't have a bed. That within the span of 4 days, I was opening up the door of Tularian Treatment Center down in Madison. And I went into a 30-day program, and it was a absolute life changer for me. And I finally knew that I had to do what I should have done a long time ago, which was I had to deal with that ugly secret that I had tried to bury in the closet for years. I had to finally deal with that pain. I had to deal with that anger. I had to deal with that resentment. I had to deal with that abandonment, because now it wasn't only was I thinking about the first time when I was actually adopted, but now I got dealing with the second time 6-7 years ago, when you decided to just get up and leave without me having an answer and giving me an answer that I truly believe that I was rightly deserved to get. And so I started dealing with that. And my clinician said, write a letter to him. And it took me about a week to do that. And she said, read it to me after I wrote it. And I read it to her, and the first thing out of her mouth was, wow, you're angry. And I said, yeah, I am. So I started really working on that. And it wasn't until after the 30-day treatment, really taking a look at my lack of spirituality and um, my journey to my spiritual journey that I needed to go on. And I've been on it and I will continue to be on it. But after I got out of the treatment, I went to intensive outpatient, and there was one particular project that I had to do. And go figure, it was after watching a kids movie called Inside Out. And the project was to make a list and drawings of all the islands that you destroyed because of your drinking and the ones that you wanted to rebuild. And as I typically do, and Christine probably may know this now, but even back then in college, I would always wait till the last minute, even the morning of, to get my homework done. And this project was no different. Done, and I had everything in my head. I just needed to put it on a piece of paper. And for about an hour straight, I don't know that the pen actually left the piece of paper except to flip to another piece of paper. And at the end of it, Rachel was in working with her door shut. And I looked up at the ceiling, I put the pen down, and I let out this big sigh of relief. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't angry anymore. It was like I took that 100-pound bag of bricks that I had been hauling around for all those years, was let go. And it was just like I had a moment of clarity. So that might have been more than 8 minutes or 9 minutes, but I could sit here and I could talk all night about all the things that have happened, because there's a lot to share. But majority of the people on this call, I know, and I actually grew up with a number of them too. So some of you kind of had heard this story before, maybe not so in depth, but this is the short version of a long story.
Well,
And again, Christine, thank you again for allowing me to talk and share on this platform. It's an absolute pleasure.
and thank you, Peter, for being so open and so vulnerable as you share your story. Because with you sharing your story, it becomes very obvious in terms of how being an adopted child also impacted your whole journey and your relationship with alcohol, and then your recovery journey. And so we appreciate that and we learn from that. So thank you so much. And maybe we go back to Chris now as well. And Chris, you've also done some research on adoption and its impact on relationship with substance misuse. Can you share with us anything additional that you're learning or things that you're learning that connect with Peter's story?
Yeah, definitely. And Peter, what a beautiful share, and it warms my heart to hear people tell their stories because it's so important. We used to be a society of storytellers, and we've lost that art. So thank you for sharing that. It's so interesting when you look back and when the child is taken away from the mother, right? And what it tends to happen is they get colicky, they get whiny, right? And then what do the hospitals give those babies? They give them a drug. So they pacify the baby from infancy, right? They don't give them, a breast. They don't give them a bottle. They give them a drug, right? And so from early stages, you're giving children drugs, right? And we see this in a number of different areas within the addiction space, in particular to SSRIs, to get people out of depression. You're giving them chemical substances that are altering their brain, and you're not giving them an opportunity to soothe themselves, right? It's no different than a helicopter parent, right? Telling the kid, doing everything for their kid. You're not giving the child an opportunity to soothe themselves. So you're just giving in, and you're not giving them an opportunity to learn. So when it comes to, the addiction story, drugs are in play early on, number one, right? And the trauma is felt early on, and it's covert because you don't really talk about it. Like, my parents told me I was adopted at age 3, and until I was about 12 years old, every year on my birthday, I would run away. I don't know why. I would run away, and it wasn't like, a huge runaway, like, county over. It was just down the block with a suitcase that I couldn't carry. But it was just the act of, I never have celebrated my birthday, and that's constant with a lot of adoptees, because there's so much trauma around it that they haven't dealt with it because they were never allowed to deal with it. I also too had an older sister who was adopted, and I won't tell her story, but she was 2 years older than me. She did everything wrong. So I learned the opposite of what to do from her, right? Was that ever really Chris living his life the way he was supposed to? No, it was in fear, and it was do the opposite of what that person's doing, because then your mommy will like you, right? And it's all about that. It's about protection and feeling safe. And, adoptees end up playing a role that they're never supposed to play. They play the mother to protect themselves. They take care of themselves, despite what my mom was amazing. She was great, and Peter says the greatest parents ever. And they're all great. You sound different. You smell different. Everything is just different, right? So you're trying to find your place in this world and trying to find your place and your role in your family. And you don't really know what your role is, because all you're doing is becoming a people pleaser, because you just don't want the backlash to come back to you, right? So what's weird is that it wasn't until my mother passed away that I kind of was like, oh shit, now I can go find my biological parents, right? Because my sister went and found them, hers, and it tore my mom apart, right? So even that, like, it's so hard to juggle the emotions of other people when you're still trying to juggle your own, and you've never really dealt with your own. I never went to therapy. I never did any of those things to deal with the initial trauma. So, I think why this has impacted my life is that now that I know the things that I know, I want to share them with as many people as possible, as many people that understand adoption is a big issue. And if we can, an amazing woman, is Dr. Zubov, who did a study back in 2024, and it's still being peer reviewed, but she shared some interesting statistics that adoptees are 36.7 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adopted individuals, right? And so that stems from, obviously, the addiction story as well. They feel like they're not loved. They feel like they're not, they don't belong, because they never have felt belong, like to a tribe. They just don't know. And on top of that statistic is birth mothers are 40 times more likely to attempt suicide by giving away their child, and 80% wish that they never did it. So there's something within the statistics that we're not understanding the model, and a lot of it, adoption feels like a transaction right now, and you're paying for a child, and that child feels like an investment. And that's the way that I felt. I felt like an investment my entire life. I went into finance, I went into banking, and just tried to prove my parents that I was a worthy investment. And not until later, way later in life, in my 40s, early 40s, I was like, I am worth it. And I'm going to find out what my path is and what my purpose is on this world. And it's telling my story and talking to people and helping families that are going through adoption, addiction, suicidal ideation, and try to bring it back to the core. So, you know, that's where the research comes in, and you always got to be a little hesitant about research because, you know, sometimes it's garbage in, garbage out. But these are real bodies, real stories. So
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights. And we also know that you're a parent. So with that in mind, and you also being adopted, and knowing that there may be parents who have adoptees that hear this recording, what advice do you have for them as they go on their journey with adoption and possibly
yeah,
substance misuse or not?
yeah. Have conversations. You know, you gotta get to the crux of it, and you gotta give them their space to become who they're supposed to be, not who you want them to be. And you gotta ask the tough questions. And you know, in coaching, we ask a lot of open-ended questions. And you know, as soon as kids feel like they're being led down a path, they'll just answer that question with what you think that you want, right? So the first thing is and I know that Christine was going to share this book, but it's called The Primal Wound, and it's by Nancy Newton Verrier, and she has some rules, five cardinal rules that I think serve a lot of people, and obviously never threaten abandonment. Um, Abandonment is the number one issue we all deal with as humans, but as adoptees especially, we've gone through the trauma. And then acknowledge your children's feelings with empathy. Um, it's so important to let them have that emotion, let them sit there in that emotion, and be okay with it, because anger is okay. You got and then, like I said, allow your child to be themselves. I think that's very important. Um, and don't try to take the place of the birth mother, because there's a connection and there's a bond that has been broken, but the child can still feel that epigenetic DNA running through their body. They can feel the stress that the mother went through. They can feel the pain that the mother went through. And ancestrally along the lines, we can unfinished business from generations. You can feel it. So just don't try to take the place of the mother, and you can't take away your child's pain, right? You got to let them sit in the mud. Let them sit in it. The pain is going to be there. They're going to feel it. You're going to feel it. And it's something about human condition is we want to take away everyone's pain, but you can't. You just got to let them write their own story, become the architect of their own story, and live their own story. I think that'll serve me with my children, and it'll serve people with their children, and particularly adoptees.
Thank you. And it does come down to some really strong parenting skills with deep intentionality. And so thank you for sharing those insights.